So today we're going to be making bacon cheddar risotto, which isn't a traditional mix-in for risotto, but I don't really give a shit and you probably don't either. You're probably thinking like me that anything with bacon and cheddar is awesome, so why not try risotto? Okay, we're gonna start things off by getting our mise en place ready, which is a French term meaning everything put in place. And in the restaurant industry, it refers to being organized and having everything ready to go before you get started. So we're gonna get all of our prep work done before we put the risotto pan onto the stove. And with this bacon, start with 3 to 4 slices and cut them down into bite-sized chunks roughly a ½ inch or so in size. And once you're finished with that, head over to the stove top and place a pan over low to medium heat. Go ahead and toss in the bacon, and it's actually better to add the bacon when the pan is cold because we want to slowly render it out to crisp it up. If the heat is too high, the bacon will cook unevenly, so keep the heat low. So continue to stir the bacon as it cooks, and after about 5 minutes or so it should be well browned, and you should see foamy white bubbles in the pan indicating that the bacon is done. It may not be fully crisp yet in the pan, but it will crisp up as it cools, and cooking it too far beyond this point might impart a bitter flavor into the bacon. So take it off the heat and let's get our cheese ready. And I'm going to be using this block of white cheddar cheese, and I'm going to use the largest side of my box grater, and I'm going for roughly 3 to 4 ounces, which should be 1/2 of a block or just under that if you don't have a scale. And if you don't have a shredder with large size holes, use whatever shredder you have, it will be fine. And once you have all the cheese shredding done, set it aside and let's get our aromatic vegetables ready. And for that, I'll start with 1 shallot, and I'm going to cut it into a small dice, so I'm going for 1/4 inch or less. You want it to blend into the risotto without having any noticeably large pieces while you're eating it. And if you're unfamiliar, these cut just like an onion. Start with horizontal cuts, spacing them 1/4 inch apart, followed up by vertical pole-to-pole cuts with the same spacing, and finish up by cutting down through both of them. We're also going to use 2 garlic cloves here, and an easy way to remove the shell is to use the side of your knife and lightly smash the clove. You don't need to completely pulverize it here. A small amount of pressure will break it loose and it will peel away fairly easily. And we're going to mince these up fairly small, and there's no special technique here. Just run your knife through it a few times and you'll eventually get there. Okay, now that we've got our mise en place out of the way, we're ready to make risotto. And I'm going to be using Arborio rice for this, which is the most common rice used to make risotto. Now in Italy, they also use carnaroli rice to make risotto, but I've literally never seen that in the store. Not one time. And I've looked for it, so I'm not entirely convinced that it's even a real thing. And a little bit behind the terminology of this dish, the term riso means rice in Italian, so preparing rice by this method, it's referred to as risotto. If you prepare other grains by this method, such as orzo, it's referred to as orzotto, or in the case of farro, it's farrotto. Okay, to get started with this, place 4½ cups of chicken stock over medium heat, and on a burner next to it, set the risotto pan down, and this pan can be a sauce pot or a saute pan, whatever's most practical to you. Then add 1 tablespoon of butter to the pan, and once that melts, toss in the shallots and garlic. And we're going to sweat these out for a few minutes. We're not looking to get any browning here, we're only looking to soften them up a little bit. And once they become slightly translucent like you see here, go ahead and add 8 ounces of the arborio rice to the pan. Give it a stir and continue stirring the rice, and we don't want any color on these either. We're just lightly toasting the outside. This should take 3 to 4 minutes to do this, and what you're looking for is for the grains to turn a little bit translucent on the outside, and they should have a small white dot in the center. I tried lining the camera up to see this, but the camera isn't the best at catching this, but you'll know it when you see it. And once you're finished up with that step, go ahead and work in 2 ounces of white wine, and this is going to reduce down relatively quickly, and what you're looking for is for it to be almost completely evaporated, and the French term used for this is au sec, meaning nearly dry. And once you reach that point, you can begin incrementally adding the stock, so add 1/4 to 1/3 of the stock from the other burner. And then we can begin the stirring process. So the process of making risotto might seem fussy and complicated, but it's really not all that bad once you kind of have an understanding of why you're doing what you're doing. The basic idea is to have the starch within the rice granules combine with the cooking liquid, and as the rice absorbs the water from the cooking liquid, it thickens up, and that's how you end up with your porridge-like consistency. And the reason we only add a small amount of stock at a time is to keep the mixture concentrated, which forces more agitation and friction between the granules, which releases more starch into the liquid. And the reason that the stock is kept hot is to not slow down or halt the cooking. Okay, jumping back into it, we can see that the first round of stock has almost completely absorbed, and we can drag the spatula across the bottom and see the pan without it filling back up, so we're ready to add another round of stock. And same thing here, except this time we're going to work in about 1/2 of the stock, or 1/3 of what was originally in the pot. And repeat the same process here, stirring constantly and scraping the side residue back into the risotto, and once again you'll reach the point of dragging the spatula across the bottom, indicating that the stock has absorbed, and at that point we're ready to work in the final addition of stock. One difference here though is that I'm going to leave a small amount of stock in the pot. I started with 4.5 cups, but a general ratio for risotto is 4 parts stock to 1 part rice. But I always start with a little extra to account for the possibility of excess evaporation or maybe the need to adjust the final consistency. Also with this final round, I'm not going to take the evaporation quite as far because sometimes when adding the cheese it can thicken up slightly. So stop when it's still somewhat liquidy, make any salt adjustments, kill the heat, and begin adding your cheese. And you want to work this in incrementally or a little bit at a time and stir it together to prevent clumping. And I mentioned that the risotto can thicken up when adding the cheese, but mine was still slightly underabsorbed, and if that happens to you, just let it rest for a minute or two because the rice will continue to absorb the stock and thicken up. And a little side note here, after filming this I realized that I forgot to add a tablespoon of butter that I had set aside to work in at this stage. I must have been a little off my game there, so if you're making this, add a little butter here too. And the final consistency you're looking for here is referred to as allonde in Italian, meaning wave-like. And it should be creamy and porridge-like with tender, discernible grains. So looking at this, we're ready to plate this thing up. And this one is fairly simple. Add a serving of risotto to a bowl of your choosing, top with our crispy bacon pieces from earlier, and finally garnish with some thinly sliced green onions. And with that, we've reached the end of the video. Thank you for your support, and I hope you enjoy the recipe, and we'll see you next time.